Hi everyone, my name is Charlie and today I have my August wrap-up. The first book that I read in August was Grief is the Thing with Feathers by Max Porter. A lot of people on BookTube, on YouTube, have been talking about this book for a while now. It's not my copy. I was at my friend Abercrombie's house and I saw this book on her shelf and she said that I could borrow it, and I said that I didn't think you could read this book without having read Crow by Ted Hughes, and she said that she'd read it and it was perfectly fine not to have read it. I read a few of the Crow poems that she had, but I do agree with her because I read this completely on its own and believe that it could stand on its own. It feels like it's part poetry, part novel, it experiments with prose. I'm one of these people in life who's experienced quite a bit of grief, and I always like to see whether it has been done well, and I do believe that it's being done well within this book. I like the personification of Crow. I like all these different characters, and it did feel very real, like these people were going through the motions of grief and the experiences that you end up having. I do believe that this book works best when read in one sitting. It dealt with grief brilliantly. I'm going off my Goodreads review here, but it emphasised the chaos and reasoning that we make when we are grieving, and the use of Crow as this catalyst to explore grief worked splendidly. I have adverbs and adjectives and synonyms aplenty for this book. And anyway, as someone who does enjoy reading experimental fiction, this is a very good experimental book. It's basically a novella in its size, long poem, whatever you want to call it. I do believe that it should be read. Next, I have my birthday gift from Abercrombie. We didn't meet in July to exchange the gift, so it was the start of August, and it is The House of Silk by Anthony Horowitz. This is an official sequel to the Sherlock Holmes stories. It follows the same voice of Dr. Watson, regaling us with this tale of Sherlock Holmes that has so far gone untold because of the darkness of the themes within. I thoroughly enjoyed this book. Ended up in the car waiting for my mother, and I'd read Grief is the Thing with Feathers while sat there, so then I started The House of Silk and I finished it over the next 2 days. I think it's brilliant, and this book ended up being the reason that I kind of pushed the Robin Hood books aside, because it just made me want to read crime fiction again, and I am a great lover of genre fiction. Crime fiction is one of those things that I like. To me, they're very good summer reads because they are very good escapism novels, and you have the time to try and work things out. Didn't actually work out what the House of Silk was going to be in here. Anyway, the plot follows this man who goes to Sherlock Holmes asking for his help because this man is following him. The man who's following him turns up dead, which sparks off this further mystery, and I really like the unravelling within the novel here, and it did remind me of the great adventure stories and the way that Sherlock Holmes made me feel when I was younger. Yes, I know I said that I don't try and recapture my youth, but that is definitely something that has happened here. The next book I'm unsure about. I don't know how I feel about it, and that is The Maker of Swans by Paraic O'Donnell. Sorry, I don't know how to correctly pronounce the name. This book is blurbed as being similar to The Night Circus, and I can understand that because it definitely has this man and has some mystery and is almost like a gothic novel. However, there are elements that felt modern, and the story is of Mr. Crow, who lives in this mansion that is crumbling, and he has some sort of magic that is touched upon, and I'm not sure whether it's magic, whether it's metaphor. I know that this is a book that people say you need to read deeply, and I was trying so hard to figure out what this book was about, but I just couldn't, and it took me so long to read. And I really, at the start, I enjoyed it. I really do like verbose language, and these books with the verbose language, and when they're being grandiloquent. I like a novel that can be grandiloquent and can tell a plot, but the problem here was that O'Donnell was using the verbose language to hide the fact that the book doesn't really tell you anything. And I know sometimes people appreciate an open-ended novel, but I do believe that in an open-ended novel you need to have some sort of conclusion, and that conclusion wasn't here. It just involved this... It just got very strange, and The first half of the story is told in two parts, and the first half of the book was great and really evoked this mystery and who this Dr. Chaston was. He's a figurehead of a secret society, and you're wondering who he is. Why is he coming to question Mr. Crow, and why can't Clara speak, and who is Eustace, and who are all these characters? The problem is that none of these, you aren't given any answers, and I don't want all of the answers, and I appreciate an open-ended book every now and then, but there was far too much open-endedness to this book for me to truly appreciate it, and I think that less attention should have been focused on making every sentence feel like treacle and more attention to plot. And I know in literary fiction sometimes you don't have plot, but I know writers who manage to work it out very well. An example of this, Joanne Harris. Brilliant writer. I am constantly astounded by her work, and she writes some of the most fantastic, unctuous prose there is, and presents it with a plot that is usually most superb, and I didn't get that here, and it was something that I'd hoped for. Next, we have the Monogram Murders by Sophie Hannah. This is a further adventure for Hercule Poirot, and I didn't like it. I feel the book is too long, and Hannah tries to make the plot extremely convoluted when it didn't need to be. I think this book would have been better if the plot had been simplified, and there would have been more chance of not realising who the killer actually was. This book begins with a woman going to Hercule Poirot fearing for her life, and he obviously becomes intrigued. He's that type of person. Then there are these people who turn up dead at a hotel, and Poirot ends up investigating both things whilst trying to keep this woman alive. And I'm a great fan of Agatha Christie, and I can't help but feel like Sophie Hannah had just taken a few choice thoughts about who Poirot was and turned him into this really terrible caricature. Next, I read In Bitter Chill by Sarah Ward. I think this book is fantastic. It is set in a small Derbyshire town and follows Inspector Francis Sadler as he tries to solve the mystery of a girl who went missing 30 years ago after her mother has committed suicide. There is a lot of talk about family in here, and one of the main protagonists is a family historian who she also ends up being kind of like an amateur detective, in that you get a lot of sides to crime fiction within here. You get the Nordic noir, even though it's set in Derbyshire, so Derby noir. Well, no, if it's Nordic. What do you have? Peak noir? I don't know, maybe Sarah Ward and Stephen Booth could start their own subgenre of crime fiction. Anyway, there is also the amateur detective in the form of Rachel, and Sadler follows the very typical crime novels of that you find within the British genre for crime, like your Inspector Morse's and your Inspector Wexford's, only I found him a lot more readable, and I found this book a lot more readable, and I really enjoyed it. And I think that if you want to try crime fiction but you aren't sure where to start, Sarah Ward would be a great place to start, because she's definitely done her research into the crime genre and she knows what it's all about, and it was a great read. Finally, I read The Mad Ship by Robin Hobb, the second book in the Live Ship Traders trilogy. I read this for the Hob Along Read Along, and it is 906 pages of awesomeness. There was a point where I thought that I was bored, and I must say that I don't think I was bored. I think because it's such a lengthy novel and I wanted to be finished, I was saying, because I wanted to read other books, I was saying I was bored with this one. So what I did, I put this book down and I went and read all the books that I wanted to, and then it put me right back into the mood for reading The Mad Ship. Something strange happened within this book that I ended up liking characters that I previously hated, and usually I'm one of these people who, once I have an opinion about someone or a book, that is it. That's my opinion of them, and they can never be redeemed. And that it was strange to find this character redeemed in my eyes. I'm not going to talk much about this book. It follows on from the plot of Ship of Magic, so I don't want to say too much in case I spoil that book. But I really enjoy this series. I probably enjoy it more than the Farseer trilogy. This introduces new characters, takes us further around the world and gives us more knowledge of that world. Hobb is a stupendous writer, and I just think that with the Live Ship Traders trilogy, she's just gone wild, and it is great to see these plots and this brilliantly huge family saga, and just forget Elena Ferrand and read Robin Hobb's Live Ship Traders trilogy, because I don't care whether you don't like fantasy, I think everybody should be reading these books. Now, I don't usually do to-be-reads, but I did start some other books in August that I didn't end up finishing, so I'm hoping to finish these books in September, and the first of those books is The Adventure of the Christmas Pudding by Agatha Christie. After reading the Monogram Murders, I had to make sure that what I was thinking about Poirot was right, and so I found this collection of short stories at the shop and borrowed it. So I've read the first story, and it's great to read the very short stories because you are able to understand where Christie was coming from in her writing. And the next book that I'm planning on reading, but I might not get around to because I'm not actually that far into it, is Moriarty by Anthony Horowitz. This is not a sequel to The House of Silk. This book follows two different detectives after Reichenbach, and yeah. I am also continuing to read Ship of Destiny by Robin Hobb. I'm hoping to finish that quite soon, actually, because there are a great many books that I need to read, and the Hobbalong has now had dates pushed back, so it should be completely accessible. It should be easier, and I am hoping so, because I love these books and I don't want to fall behind. Although I did make a mistake, I've not been reading the forums until after I finished the books, because I don't, and I've not entered into any discussions either, because I often forget what happened from book to book. Well, I remember all the events that happened within the books, but I can't remember which book they happened in. But I spoiled the third book for myself because I get an email about the group on Goodreads, and the first sentence was a spoiler, and I didn't want to read it. I was just trying to delete it, and it went completely wrong for me. So the third book has had a point spoiled for me, but not everything, and I'm still really enjoying it, and I look forward to the other books. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and until next time, that is all.